Welcome back. Well, as the world marks World Refugee Day, the Southern African Institute for Responsive and Accountable Governance says that all nations are obligated to receive and host refugees as members of the United Nations family. According to the UNHCR, the number of people forced to flee conflict, violence, human rights violations and persecution has now surpassed 100 million for the first time on record. A recent IPSOS report suggested that the Ukraine crisis has increased the public openness to refugees and reversed some of the concerns raised by the coronavirus pandemic. To take this discussion further, then we are now joined via Zoom by the Vulnerable Group Manager at the Foundation for Human Rights, Sarah Motha. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you, Flo, and the audio viewers at home.
All right. Well, political refugees and environmental refugees. Let's talk about the difference there and what both of these groups, how both these groups should be treated and how differently they should be treated.
Firstly, I appreciate the question because now we're talking of environmental refugees, which is quite a phenomenon, pushing stronger as the climate conditions continue to change and becoming hazardous to human existence, and therefore forcing people to migrate or to be displaced from their home towns or home countries to move somewhere. So those are migrants or refugees or people that get displaced as a result of the harsh climatic conditions that are being faced, and perhaps some of what we might call man-made reasons of sustainable development, when someone decides to construct a project such as a dam for sustainable development. Therefore, environmentally, it means that the people living there have to migrate because of this need, which will benefit also the people living there in the near future. Therefore, when you talk about political refugees, those are fleeing persecution on the basis of their civil and political rights affiliations. Could it be your different political belief, or your religious belief, or your ethnic being, and therefore not allowed to live in your country or in your own community, and therefore you find yourself moving elsewhere to seek asylum. Quite often when you are called a refugees, when you have left your own home country and went to another nearby or other country to seek refugee or a place of safety.
The other question comes between refugees and asylum seekers. One would think they're the same thing. It's just that refugees is what's been formalized, what a country would recognize as a refugee. When asylum seeker does get to refugee status, at what point does a country decide that an asylum seeker has now become a refugee? What must be the elements that make one a refugee?
There is a process when you arrive in a country. Quite often there is legislation governing how administration for those seeking refuge can be dealt with. So you declare yourself in the country of asylum, or where you're seeking safety as someone who requires protection, and therefore while this process is still being reviewed, you then called an asylum seeker. And then once it's then confirmed, because therefore the process includes confirmation that in your home country there are those conditions that demanded that you flee your own country. Therefore, once those conditions have been confirmed, which are largely civil and political conditions, therefore you do qualify to be a refugee. In that moment, you are called an asylum seeker, pending affirmation of your claim as to whether in your country there are reasons that can be founded to qualify you to be a refugee in that particular country.
Yeah, as we sort of close our conversation, I want to focus on the very important element of human rights, and certainly refugees, over years have always complained about human rights violation, and one wonders if these human rights violations are linked to perhaps countries being overwhelmed by their own citizens, their own people, and therefore not being able necessarily to take care of the human rights of those considered refugees. Is that one of the problems that are being faced by refugees?
Yet, as a vulnerable population coming to a new country looking for a place of safety in countries which are already burdened by their own challenges to provide for basic needs of their own people, quite often that is seen as a threat. In other countries, they do have what we call refugee camps, but those camps also, the residents of those refugee camps, quite often they face raids and attacks by the insurgencies, the groups that they are fleeing from. They are able to easily identify them and attack them in those camps. So the vulnerability not only extends to the pressures of the local population wondering how to provide for the refugees, but also the refugees themselves. Quite often, numerous times, they had been attacked and even got to be recruited or forced to join the militia groups that they are trying to flee from. And there's been systematic also sexual violence happening in refugee camps where supposedly there should be safety. So the vulnerability extends beyond the host country population to the refugees or these asylum seekers themselves.
All right, Sarah Motha, thanks very much for giving us your input here as, of course, we commemorate World Refugee Day. Thanks for your time. That is Sarah Motha, who is the Vulnerable Groups Manager at the Foundation for Human Rights.